Welcome to Amy's Bookshelf Reviews podcast. Sit back and listen to interviews, discussion about books, and anything else literary. There's always something or someone new on the show. Good evening, listeners, and welcome to Amy's Bookshelf Reviews podcast, Behind the Books, Honest Voices, Real Stories. I'm Amy Shannon, and each episode brings you heartfelt conversations with the storytellers behind the stories, authors, publishers, and creatives who shape the literary world. It's the second Sunday of the month, and welcome to Storytime for all ages. Today we are talking with an author who is an author of a series of children's books. Will you please introduce yourself and tell us where people can find you?
Well, hi. Thank you, Amy. My name is Bill Hoolihan. My fancy author name is B. William Hoolihan, but everybody calls me Bill. I do have a website, bwilliamhoolihan.com, where you can find my children's books. And boy, I'm really happy to join you on your podcast now.
Thank you very much. And it's always my intention that adults read children's books. And having read all of yours, I recommend that even more. So your books, you have a series, and they're called the Uncle George stories. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how these kind of came about?
Sure thing. Would you mind, I've got an introduction in my book. I was going to read you a couple of paragraphs, if you don't mind, which gives you an idea. And then I can expand on your question about, why I did this.
That's fine. Go right ahead.
So this is the introduction. My memories of my grandfather, Charles Rand, are few. However, one in particular stands out. When I was 4, I awoke one Christmas morning to the delicious smell of apples sizzling in a skillet. A tall, white-haired man with a marvelous smile was whistling and cooking in my mother's tiny kitchen. After a wonderful country breakfast, we opened presents, and later that day, he chased me around the house with my new toy robot. It was one of the happiest days of my life. Everything else I know about my grandfather is based on stories my family told me. He was quite a character. When they spoke of him, it was with great love, respect, and admiration. How unfair that I spent so few hours with him. From 1961 to 64, he wrote over 30 letters to me about his boyhood adventures in Vanceburg, Kentucky. They took place around the turn of the 20th century and were about his wonderful Uncle George and Aunt Het, who lived on a farm on Kinnickinnick Creek. I barely remember my mother reading the letters to me, so it came as a surprise as an adult when she handed me a weathered folder containing the originals. Through his words, I traveled back in time and began connecting with him 50 years after his passing. And so what I've done with these letters is I've sort of converted them into stories and book stories and trying to preserve his legacy. But as I was doing that, I really thought that, the world needs to hear his letters. And so that was my inspiration for generating the Uncle George stories. And Wooly Broom, I think you may have mentioned it. He's one of the favorite characters within the stories.
Definitely. Yes. Having read all of, the 9 books that you have out for Uncle George stories, Wooly Broom definitely stands out. Nero, Bulger, he's a very good dog. So, we're getting ready for Christmas, and your most recently published Uncle George book is the 9th one in the series, and it's Wooly Broom's Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
So, tell me a little bit about that one.
Well, sure. So let me start at the beginning. I truly believe Wooly Broom existed based on the letters. And Uncle George found him as a bear cub, as an abandoned bear cub. And he had a funny tail that looked like a broom. And he had funny hair that was woolly. So he named his bear cub Wooly Broom. And, in the circus, we've seen bears that are very agile and very, somewhat friendly. I don't think he didn't really cage him. The bear could come and go as he pleased, But I believe there was a friendship between Uncle George and Wooly Broom. And, and then in kind with my, grandfather, who was just a boy at the time. So there's lots of little adventures that I truly believe are based in fact with Wooly Broom. Now, like you said, the final book in this series, Aunt Het and Uncle George come up with the idea of having a Christmas dinner for all little farm animals and the animals that are in the woods that surround them. And that doesn't sound unreasonable, putting up food for these guys. And in this particular episode, Wooly Broom acts as the maitre d', and he goes around, or as the host, he goes around into the forest and bites the polecats and the raccoons and the possums and the owls and all the little, animals. And the farmers cook specific foods for each different animal, and they stay inside the farmhouse while Wooly, has a dinner for all these little animals. And it's just the sweetest thing.
Yes, and even when chaos breaks out, that makes it even more fun.
Yeah, a little bit of chaos. We won't ruin the ending or.
No, no. And yeah, you have, Aunt Het and Uncle George and Charlie, they're just great. I see them as people because they were real people, and now they're in a story that is, my guess is a lot of the stuff, like you said, happened. And just farm life, especially, with the early 1900s, you would say.
Yeah.
So you're in Kentucky, it's the early 1900s, and you have a farm, and beyond that, there's an apple orchard and some other, they have walnut trees and hickory trees. So it's kind of like, the all-American farm, which, is something that I really enjoyed. My great-grandfather, was a farmer and always had an abundance of food, so he would give them out to his neighbors, especially during the Depression.
Oh, wow.
So reading these stories were, like, I asked my grandmother, if she, during the Depression, did they, even, did they suffer? What did they have to do? And she said, unless she happened to see a headline on a newspaper that her father was reading, that they didn't, it wasn't like for them, they didn't have a depression. They had food. Her father was a farmer and also had a secondary job, and they just, helped out their neighbors. They needed heating coal or food or whatever. That's what my grandfather would do.
Wow.
And reading these stories, I must say that it kind of brought me back to my great grandfather telling me stories. He couldn't remember my name or what he did yesterday, but he could tell me stories, when my grandmother and her siblings were kids and stuff that he used to do. And this was a man who was 89 years old and decided to climb on top of a barn and, fix the roof.
Oh, jeez.
Well, everybody's looking for him. And he's like, well, the barn's roof is leaking. And at the time, it wasn't even his house anymore. So, but that's what drew me to the stories, is that they're fun. And I do like Nero. He's sneaky, but he always and he's nosy. And
Right.
I love that.
And we all know somebody like that. They got a good heart, but they don't, on the outside, you wonder sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny when you try to eat, sorghum taffy or molasses, over popcorn balls, and we all know what that can do to your teeth.
Yeah, and there's old country logic in there. In fact, in one of the stories, they say, go rinse your mouth out, little Charlie, after you eat some sweets, because, your teeth will rot. And they didn't really talk about brushing the teeth, but they knew, sugar was not great for you. They ingested it, but but they also knew you had to, get it out of there. It really, I enjoy a lot of the aspects of, the meals and the foods. They ate, almost organically. There's no talk about fertilizers and pesticides and whatnot. They just grew what the soil would grow, and the way they would replenish the soil, from what I understand, oftentimes, I know in Florida, sorghum's grown as a crop to replenish the soil, not so much for its nutritional value. But these people, and you and I both know, they made, sorghum syrup. It was sort of like, not as sweet as maple syrup, but still it was, good enough for pancakes.
Yeah.
So I
And
enjoy reading about all, how they lived. They cooked. This surprised me. They cooked with sour milk. Well, how do you make sour milk? They take regular milk and leave it next to the stove, and it would sour. I'm like,
yeah,
to me, that doesn't sound so great, but it must be great for cooking. And even my grandfather describes drinking ice cold sour milk. They found it refreshing. Who knew?
yeah. And from some research that I've done, sometimes if they add a splash of vinegar to the milk, it does that as well. And I guess that could be where sour cream came from. I don't, not,
Sure.
but I think they do it for the tanginess. And
Right. Right. That makes sense.
drinking sour milk is not going to kill you, but it sounds very unappealing. But some of the things that, the food it's like that's what brings family together, community together.
Yes.
You have you have a story about Easter. And what I like about that is that, they're all of their congregation goes to the church and they do all these Easter stuff and bring food and all of that.
Right.
And, and then it's not the same without Woolly Room here. So it just shows how, it's, farming can be a tight knit community. And even if you're not, but you're gaining the prospects of it. I'm sure that, some food was saved specifically, for them to have, and probably if they had an abundance, they might have sold something at like a farmer's market or something similar to that. And
Yeah.
they also had various types of chickens, I should say,
Yeah.
not, yeah.
Yeah. The Dominics and the guineas and the guinea hens, and like I'd never heard of any of these before, and they all produce different colored eggs. And so when they were doing the Easter egg hunt, some of them really didn't need coloring because they were already kind of, crazy looking.
Yeah. And
It's funny you're talking about, the farm life. I recently relocated to a relatively small town in Florida called DeLand. And north of here, there's even smaller towns. And I'm invited tomorrow to a tractor parade in Seaville, Florida. And I went last year and I had the time of my life. The whole town turns out, population 483, and they dress up their tractors and you vote. There's a winner of the prettiest tractor, but some of these tractors are 50 years old. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. And they've got, banners, waving from them, with pride, and they got their grandkids sitting on the tractors. And it's just the darndest thing. And simultaneously there's a pie baking contest going on. And I love it. It's a disappearing life, but I want to participate in it and document it to the best I can with my Uncle George stories in the meantime.
oh, definitely. And I believe that these books will be enjoyed by children and adults, and they bring you back to, we say, a simpler time, but the work they did was not simple.
Mm-hmm.
It was hard.
Yeah.
They had chores, and they had to feed the animals, and they had
Hmm.
to, toil and work, as I'm sure Aunt had worked harder. Well, she obviously worked very hard, but she probably even worked harder than Uncle George. Um, and she just she found her, her niche through food, and I loved it when they were making apple cider, and she's like, make sure you save me some so I can make some vinegar.
Hmm.
And, it's just quite amazing on how when you're reading it, the illustrations and the stories, they complement each other. And it still also leaves room for your imagination. When I read about her dinner, it's like I can almost smell the bacon cooking. Especially because she went out to the smokehouse, to get the ham or to make sausage or uh,
Hmm.
bacon every morning. So, I mean, can't get much fresher than that.
Well, that's the first memory of my grandfather is he was cooking. I don't know what you call them, but it was like buttered apples in a skillet. Like he was frying the apples, but not all the way fried. That woke me up. And I ran into the kitchen like, who the heck are you? This nice man making me breakfast. And
Yeah.
so to me, breakfast is, to this day, is my favorite meal. I don't know. I love the smell of everything. In fact, there's even near us here in DeLand, there's a spring north of here, 20 miles, and they took a old sugar mill and turned it into what I call a pancake house. And I would go there with my grandmother when I was very little, and there was a griddle in the middle of the table. They bring you batter and bacon and eggs and whatnot, and you cook your own breakfast in the middle of the table. It'd be very cold. It was cold and damp in there, and boy, what a memory! Like just I wish my grandfather had been there, but he lived in West Virginia and Kentucky, and she lived down here primarily because of my mother's health. She did not do well in the northern climes, and so she flourished down here in Florida. So that sacrifice was my grandparents lived apart a lot much of the year because his businesses were up there, not in Florida.
Yeah. Wow. But
But I do
still,
love breakfast.
I can see. I mean, sometimes I like breakfast for dinner.
Oh, don't get me started.
So you have a cascade of interesting characters. So we have Woolly Broom,
Hmm.
Nero's the wolf. We've got Balder, who's the dog, and he seems to
Hmm.
be a very smart dog, especially when he's supposed to find a honey tree by trailing
Hmm.
a single bumblebee.
I was
And
fascinated by that.
yeah,
I guess I should talk to a bee expert to see if that's possible, but yeah, they capture the bumblebee. It lands on their pancakes at breakfast, and Aunt Het ties a little red string to the bumblebee and tells Bulger the dog to follow it to the hive, which they do. And I don't want to tell the rest of the story, but
right.
it sounds kind of logical.
Yeah, and um I love reading old cookbooks and stuff like that, and I found that, if you want to find the honey, you have to follow the bees,
Hmm.
because they may have a hive outside, but usually it's inside the tree where they have the
Right.
honeycomb, and you can get honey, and I'm sure that they probably made use of honeycomb in some way. Some use they use the wax for candles or things like that. So I know on a farm, that if possible, nothing goes to waste.
Right. I thought it was very nice with the honey tree story. They're very respectful of the hive. They didn't take everything. They didn't destroy it. They didn't knock the tree down. They they borrowed some for their own needs and then let the little bees alone. And the way Uncle George, he didn't have a bee suit or anything. He just moved real slow and didn't agitate them. So again, they were very respectful of their environment. They were good with the land, I think. And now I'm really craving some honey. So darn it.
Yeah, right over nice Johnny cakes or cornmeal pancakes, or like your Uncle George liked, what was it? A mixture of buckwheat and cornmeal. No,
Yep. No,
buckwheat is
funny.
pretty bitter, so I've had buckwheat pancakes, so does sound good. And I would Aunt Het must have a talent for tying a string around a bee. I mean, really, that.
Well, remember these ladies probably sewed and quilted and could thread the eye of a needle, and their eyes are probably 100 times better than ours, and they were dexterous because they use their hands all day.
Yeah,
What you and I could do probably doesn't, pales to what they could do. But again, I just love, the stories are just so sweet and so nice. Um, I have, he wrote me 30 letters and I did the first 9 into stories. And so now my challenge is if this series is somewhat of a success, I'd like to do another series of them. I even, eventually I run out of letters, and just as an exercise, I created my own letters, so to speak, of a nice little adventure that they go on. That's very plausible. And so I have everybody blaming, the boy gets lost, Charles, my grandfather gets lost for a day, and people are blaming the wolf for his disappearance. But as it turns out, he really was helping the boy, and the only person who knew that was Wooly Broom. So I thought that was a sweet way to end the tale. Everything ends out okay, but sometimes, you think some things, people or animals are bad, but they're really not. You just don't understand the whole complexity.
oh yeah, exactly. I know. I have arguments with my cat all the time. Seriously, I do, and he just meows back at me, and if I meow to him, he looks at me like, "How do you know my language?" But
You had mentioned that Bulger, the dog, was a very wise dog, and I don't know if this story will make it, but he did write me a letter as a man, and he was in the Navy, or he went to a naval academy. I know he served during World War One.
mm-hmm.
So he was on leave, and he was walking out to the farm, and it was, I don't know, 5 or 10 mile hike from Vansford, and a snowstorm caught him off guard. And he said he could barely see the road. He wasn't dressed properly, and he was in this horrible snowstorm, very cold. And out of nowhere, Bulger the dog showed up. And Bulger, led him back to the farm a mile or two. And we got there, and Uncle George was very happy to see him. They dusted him off the snow and gave him some tea or whatnot. And he eventually said to his aunt and uncle, "Wow, thank you for sending Bulger out to find me." And they said, we didn't know you were coming. We didn't send the dog out. And so, how cool is that the dog knew he was in distress and went out looking for him?
Yeah, that is amazing, and it's I've heard stories where dogs got left behind or they got lost, but
Right.
somehow they ended up coming back home. And, I think there's a lot about dogs that we don't know.
Sure.
And they are definitely smarter than we give them credit for.
Well, maybe that's a topic for another episode, another podcast. I had a long talk with a cardiologist a while ago, and, licensed, fully MD, all this. And he believed in a thing called the heart field. And he believed that people can communicate, via their good hearts and bad hearts. And he says the field is limitless. And I was fascinated by that. Again, it's a topic for another day, but oftentimes he believes intuition is based on this heart field, reaching out, in almost infinite in distance. And I think that's how animals find their way home, that they're in tune with their owners and
Yeah.
vice versa, and they follow their energy, so to speak.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
It's a nice concept. Science will probably never prove it, but it's a nice concept.
Yeah, I mean, I have my son and his husband, they have a dog who's my grandbaby. And one time I was having a health issue where I was having an awake seizure, and the dog was over.
Wow.
And I was sitting in a chair, he immediately sat on my lap. And then once I kind of calmed down, my son was able to put me in bed, and the dog came and he just laid right on top of me till my body completely calmed down.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was like, thank you, because no one else has been, no
Yeah,
one can bring me out of that, but he did, and he was so proud, and he knows that I'm his grandmother, contrary to what my son tells me.
that's funny. It's funny.
But
We treasure our animals.
yes, we do. I don't think of them as pets. I think when I use the word pet, it's the action. I think of them as, I think they own me. It's my cats, they have me trained, so.
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah,
And everybody has their thing, you know. I mean, animals, you know, are, they know what they're there for. You know, the chickens know that the eggs, and then, of course, which it probably isn't mentioned, but I know that my great grandmother, her favorite pastime was to candle the eggs, and she did it in private.
Mm-hmm.
And my grandmother had said she could never understand why her mother was the only one that could candle the eggs. And I'm like, Gram, it's the same reason why mothers will do dishes without anyone in the kitchen. It's that peacefulness.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're away from everybody else, and that's your time to yourself. And, cause I was like, wow, you know, you have to candle an egg because you don't know what you're going to get. So,
Mm-hmm.
I always found that was interesting. But, so all 9 of your books are available for sale on Amazon, correct?
Correct.
Right. So, and I know that you'll be having some various events in your local area. And I really want to thank you for sharing Uncle George, not just with me,
Oh,
but with the world. I love Uncle George. And if you wrote more stories, I would keep reading them. So, and I think adults would get a kick out of them just as much as kids do. And, you know, the covers are bright and, you know, inviting. And then you get in there and you realize how wonderful these stories are. And sometimes I think people get away from that. You know,
exactly.
it's like, remember what you were like with a kid, even if you didn't live on a farm, but, you know, when you were a kid, you had this kind of imagination and innocence.
Mm,
And with technology these days, sometimes imagination gets put to the side. And
absolutely. Yeah.
that's why I really encourage adults also to read these books and children's books, but I highly recommend anyone, I don't care how old you are, to read your Uncle George stories.
Thank you. I'm in agreement with you.
I wonder why. No, but I think, yeah, I mean, you put them together in a book for a reason, to share, and not just with little kids, but with people. So
Right.
I really want to thank you for being on the show.
And thank you. It's funny you talk about sharing. When I endorse or sign books to people for this series I write, From My Family to Yours, which is exactly what's happening.
Exactly. And when I read, like I said, when I read it just reminds me of, you know, it brings back memories of other things, and I just can relate to it. Though I had never seen, I've heard of the guinea chickens. I had never seen one, but in the illustration, it was
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, so that's what it looks like. So again, thank you for joining, and I'll just do a little wrap up here.
Thank you.
And I will, in the description of this episode, I will put your website and the link to your Amazon profile so people can go and buy all of your Uncle George books.
Wonderful. Thank you again.
You're welcome. It's the end of another great conversation. Thank you for being on the show, and thank you, audience, for listening. If you wish for you or your book to be on the show, just go to amysbookshelfreviews.com/podcast and schedule your pre-recording. Please follow this podcast on Spotify. I'm Amy Shannon. Be safe, be well, and always be kind. Tune in here again next week for another tantalizing discussion. Thank you for listening to Amy's Bookshelf Reviews podcast.